Okay. I'm so excited for these next 2 days. I have to say, what a joy it has been to work with Sister Joan and Sister Susan and Sister Karen on this land justice initiative. And um, what your community is doing brings such a light to that national community of people that are trying to live into land justice. So it's just such a gift to get to really dive into this together and to support your community to continue being a really bright light in this work. So may that light grow over the next 2 days. So Sarah and I are going to kind of give a lay of the land, if you will, about what land justice is. What does it mean when we're talking about it, and what is the context that makes this conversation so necessary and so poignant today. So this will be about a little over a half hour of this is a presentation. So you can kind of settle in and yeah, this will be kind of setting the shared context for the rest of our time. Okay. All right. Okay. First, Brenna shared such a beautiful context of our team already. Who was familiar with the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project before you came here? Okay, great. And who was familiar with just nuns and nuns in general before this, the bigger nuns and nuns movement? Okay. So just to kind of, sometimes it helps to like, how did nuns and nuns end up being this land justice project? Like, what's the story here? Nuns and Nuns started in 2016 as a place of encounter between women religious and young community-oriented activists who were really interested in alternative forms of community. And many of those younger folks did not affiliate with a religious tradition because 40% of millennials don't. And that earns our nickname, the Nuns. Although Joan calls us the Sums because we do have something. And so I personally found this community in 2017. I was asking questions in my own life. I was 29 at the time, and I was asking, what are alternative forms of community that can support us in doing this work? If we need to live into a world beyond this economy, this extractive economy, this culture of capitalism and consumption, how do I do that, and how do I not do that alone? Realizing we really need to do that in community. Otherwise, the cultural force is just too powerful to do it alone. And so coming into the Nuns and Nuns community and coming into relationships with sisters really allowed me to explore that in really tangible ways for what this blueprint could look like in my own life and in the lives of so many of my nun companions. And I was so inspired in particular about this radical economy of women religious, how so many women were pooling their resources so that you can support one another to live counterculturally in this world, so that you can follow a spiritual path and be in service of justice in the world. And that's what I wanted. That's what we wanted. Because again, to live outside of this mainstream culture, you really need community, and our relationships with sisters really have helped clarify that in our own lives. So I began with gratitude and kind of bridging this spirit of encounter that's so important to this work. As our work unfolded, this was 2016, 2017, our country was dealing with first huge polarization, unprecedented racial inequity, climate change, climate chaos, and weather patterns changing, eventually a pandemic. And so in this work, which was about imagining a different future, we began to ask, what is the work that is ours to do together? Given our shared values in this moment, given the ecological and racial healing that we so desperately need, what might we do together? And we did a lot. We did a lot of climate justice work. I mean, we all across the country in Nuns and Nuns meetups, work for justice was unfolding from these places of encounter. And then there was this other simultaneous situation that was seemingly unrelating unfolding, which is that in so many of the actual places that we were gathering, the communities who were hosting us were sharing the uncertain future of that place and of that land. We were co-witnessing with sisters these demographic shifts that are happening in communities, with a lot of talk of divestment and disposal of tangible assets, diminishment, all these words that start with D. And for a long time, that was just a co-witnessing, but through more conversations with sisters, with movement partners, in listening to, as Grace Lee Boggs would say, what time it is on the clock of the world, we began to realize that there was a deeper calling, and that women religious had an opportunity. We're already being so creative and caring for the ways that you all care for land. And as we look to an uncertain future, the decisions that are made about land matter. And we wanted to support that creative community about thinking as prophetically and boldly as we can, and in a way that's supported by community. How can we think about land as part of the future that religious life is supporting? So the Nuns and Nuns Land Justice Project launched reluctantly at first. We said, because when these conversations started, we were like, great, let's start something together. And the sister said, no, we are busy. We would like you to do this. So we began really in that spirit of mutuality and with a desire to create the same kind of catalytic community that the Nuns and Nuns gatherings first created, serving this question of how can the future of sacred lands create new stories of healing, of racial and ecological justice. And the reason why this is so important to us is that we really believe that land is the key to racial and ecological healing. Who governs it? Who gets to love it? Who owns it? How we treat it. Land is, at the end of the day, all we have. It is all we are. And so as we reckon with this moment in the world, the ways that we have access to land to grow our food, to build our communities, is really important. And so in this work, as communities of women religious are facing, or in the next 5, 10, 20 years, we'll be facing long-term decisions about what to do with land and property. We just realize how daunting of a conversation that can feel like. And we want it to feel like one of the most potentiated, transformative, exciting questions, because it is and it can be. And so we're here to do that work, all of us together in community, to imagine that. So that's why we're here. And if the slide will let me advance, I will tell you the next thing. Okay, so let's demystify, when we talk about land justice, what that means. We talk about land justice as the practice. Let's just pause there. The repeated commitment and action over and over, the practice of centering racial and ecological justice in decisions about how land is used, loved, and governed by people. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little bit of a visual with that. And the way that we think about this, there are really 3 interlocking elements that define land justice. So we talk about protecting the land from extraction and development. but not only keeping bad things from happening, but regenerating the health of the land, something we can see evidence of all around this land that you have loved so dearly. We spent the whole day yesterday just walking the grounds with Joan and seeing the solar array and the cosmic walk and the farms. And I mean, it just goes on and on. It's incredible. And then there's this third piece, which is expanding equity and control to Black, Indigenous, and other dispossessed communities. And we're going to talk about these next 2 days really, and Sarah's going to go into this way more in depth. Why is that so important to the land itself? This is what we're saying, is that this equity piece is important for the land itself, that this racial and ecological healing aren't just dually important, they're intertwined. We're going to learn more about that later. And so, so that's how we think about this. And we're here because we really do believe that religious communities can and will be a guiding light in this world, to really show what this can look like. So in order to live to that new story, though, we first need to understand more deeply what is the history that has created this intertwined need for racial and ecological healing. What is the history of land injustice that has brought us to our current system? And from that history, we will move in these 2 days to working toward healing and repair. So Sarah's gonna illuminate some of that for us.
No. Thank you, dear.
Yes, it's a little here.
Yeah.
Let's move that here.
All right. Yeah, so let's live into a new story. And in order to do that, we also need to work from a foundation of truth. Repair requires the truth first. There we go. Nope. There we go. So in his writings about sustainable economies, E.F. Schumacher wrote, "One who uses an imaginary map, thinking that it is a true one, is likely to be worse off than someone with no map at all." Yeah, smart dude. Oh, I hate it. There we go. Whoa, why'd that go all the way over there? Yeah. She's gonna help me here. So that quote, there's a really good reveal afterwards. Here we go. Let's do this one. Great. Okay. So for about 500 years, when it comes to land and property, this, what you're seeing here on the screen, has been our map. Does anybody know what this is? I'm sure people in this room know what this is. That's right, Doctrine of Discovery. This is one of the 3 papal bulls that make up the doctrine. A set of legal decrees by the Pope that compelled European nations to, quote, invade, capture, vanquish, and subdue all non-Christians. So in this, the church declared that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered and then claimed outright. These decrees acted as the moral and the political and legal foundation for the transatlantic slave trade, for the genocide of indigenous peoples. And by 1914, the colonization of 84% of the land on Earth by European nations. 84%. So the papal bulls that make up this doctrine served as that justification for European settlers to seize land inhabited by non-Christians. And it's important to use the present tense with this doctrine because it's not something of the past. This is an active legal doctrine today. It is a linchpin of the foundation of modern US property law. Many of you will probably recognize this painting. I remember it from my history school books. It depicts manifest destiny, or the westward expansion of white settlers into what is now the US. And notice as the angel is walking across the land with the wagons and the horses and the farmers and the trains, they're depicted are indigenous people that are fleeing, that are almost coming off the screen along with the buffalo. And white settlers at this time really believed, and in many ways still do, believe they had the right to kick people off their land, their land, and destroy their way of life, and to take whatever they found. One thing that I'll note is that this image also promotes this false idea that as the US grew into what it would be, what we know it to be now, peoples indigenous to this land just kind of disappeared off the page, which we know is not true, which we know is false. What's not pictured here, of course, is that manifest destiny also meant that people felt they had the right to capture land, but that they also had the right to capture labor, life, and enslave people. So bringing indigenous people from Africa to the lands that they stole, therefore creating an economy that was really dependent on native land, but also Black bodies, life, knowledge, labor. As many of you are aware, the Vatican recently repudiated the doctrine, stating that its ideas are antithetical to Catholic teaching. However, that doesn't change the fact that the doctrine is still an active legal doctrine. 200 years ago, this year, in a case called Johnson versus McIntosh, the Supreme Court enshrined those papal bulls, that map that we saw, into US law, citing that, quote, discovery is the foundation of title, and this overlooks all proprietary rights in the natives. This is one of the first cases that new lawyers learn in law school. It is considered one of the most foundational cases in US property law to this day. And it really set a precedent for everything else that would follow. The papal bulls have been cited by the Supreme Court as recently as 2005 in a case that ruled against the Oneida people who were trying to recover stolen land in New York, here in New York. And the majority of that opinion was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So this is an image that shows us how we got here, right? This is one image. And this is another image that shows us how we got here. This is a place that many of you will recognize and know by the name of Mount Rushmore. However, this place has a much older name, Haisapa. It is one of the most sacred grounds and origin points for the Oceti, Sakowin, Lakota people. And so that's kind of like, for Christians, our Garden of Eden. Like that's how important this place is to the Lakota, Dakota, and Lakota people. That white colonists stole this land, knowingly breaking a treaty that where they promised they would never touch these hills because they knew they were sacred. Knowingly breaking that treaty, they violently took these hills and then carved the faces of 4 of their leaders, each of whom committed genocide against indigenous peoples. That to me is an act showing of how we got to where we are today. That through theft, through destruction of place and culture and people, through domination, we're living with this imprint. And in this, I'll say, I think there's a really important reframe when we hear this story and when we tell this story, because when I was growing up, I always learned that the US was a nation of immigrants. And, how, immigrants, though, take on and adapt to the laws, the language, the customs, the governance, the various social systems of the place that they move to. So the more accurate description of, I think, the dominant US culture is that it's a nation of settlers that includes recent immigrants as well, and immigrants from before, but the dominant white culture in the United States is a nation of settlers. And Patrick Wolf writes very simply that settlers destroy to replace. And that's what happened here. So in the case of, land, oh, this is a very fun animation. Wow, we have some new sparkly things going on in this presentation. So it was through the doctrine of discovery that indigenous lands were stolen, and they were allotted into parcels and given or sold for very cheap to white people by white colonial governments, who then used and continue to use literal weapons, fences, barbed wire to police these new boundaries, these new grids that were invented. And once these boundaries and grids are created, the system of private property that we use today uses the term fair market value. So that is, and I'm sure, like, can anyone just be like, what's fair market value? And exactly, it's an oxymoron. This is a great class. Okay. Yeah. So fair market value is the monetary value for land that would be a price that the highest bidders in society are willing to pay. So yeah, highest bidders in society, they set the price, which feels more like unfair market value because it's not the people with the deepest relationship. It's not the people who are most suited or capable of stewarding the land that get to do that or decide how land is used and loved or not loved. It's just the people with the most money. And people tend to think that this is a very inevitable thing, that there's no way that this could be any other way. But I would just say it's important to remember this is a fairly new invention, fair market value. This is recent history, and that there have been countless other ways that societies have chosen to govern their land and their resources together. So again, we're here in this fair market value paradigm, and as will likely surprise no one in this room, in our current society, the highest bidder in the US is almost always white. This right here is an image that depicts one facet of the racial wealth gap. Today, the median white family in the US has a net wealth of $147,000, while the median Black family has a net wealth of $3,500. Yeah, wow. Yeah. And this racial wealth gap, it comes from an accumulation of many forms of harm to communities of color. Generations of colonization, enslavement, land theft, redlining, incarceration, the many forms of discrimination that I know this room knows all too well about. I've been doing so much work of accompanying people who have been on the other side of those systems and forces. Meanwhile, on the gold part of this gap, white people in our society have accumulated massive amounts of wealth because of a system that has enabled us to steal and profit off of and afford to buy land and then pass it down to our heirs. We're gonna just see, is that gonna be a little better?
I think if you just move a little bit away from the other microphone.
Okay, thank you. All right. They don't like each other or something. They're taking some space. Okay. All right, where was I? White people, they have a lot of wealth in this country, and it's because of a system. It's because of a system where we've been able to amass that wealth and then pass it on to our heirs over centuries, which then just continues to grow. So, this contributes to a black to white wealth gap of 1 to 16. And those same policies and practices show up in land ownership. So because of these racist practices and policies, 98% of private rural land in the United States is owned by white people. 98%. And 95% of urban land. Meanwhile, people of color comprise of 70% of the farmers in this country, but again, they own less than 2% of the land, which means that we probably all ate something for breakfast that was grown by a farmer of color who works on white-owned land. So it shows up in our food system, it shows up in our land distribution. And it shows up in the very well-being of the land. The doctrine of discovery set up this current paradigm and system of treating land as a commodity, of giving individuals the right to destroy it, destroy the land they own. That's one of the legal rights an owner has when they carry title, is that they have the right to destroy it under this legal system. So not only did the doctrine justify the stealing of land or enslaving of human beings, but it also supported this very concept that the earth is a thing that could be bought, sold, mistreated for profit. And back in April, when the doctrine was repudiated, we had a panel, and our teacher, Pat McCabe, said something that just really put it simply, which was that the doctrine wasn't just a moral or ethical imposition. It was the beginning of the destruction of this Mother Earth in her entirety. So this doctrine's logic of white Christian superiority over all of creation was really cemented into a modern economy that hinges on extraction of planet and of people. And we're seeing that today. We're seeing the cost of that today. Yeah, 90% of old growth forest loss, 99% of prairie, third of our topsoil. These are all things I know you know. But again, we're really connecting it to this history. This is how we got here. And you know this very locally. The algae blooms in the dead zones that are happening because of golf courses and billionaire septic systems. Yep. Yeah, so the runoff of conventional agriculture is creating a den zone, massive at the Mississippi Delta, but it's also happening here locally. And, we are just so thrilled and excited about your partnership with the Shinnecock. And, this is an example of how we move towards repair, because clearly this is not sustainable, and this is not going to allow life to thrive in this place. So every time we think about a real estate transaction, we are dealing with this legacy, the legacy of stolen land and labor. Every private property sign, every deed holds this history. And in the words of Desi Fontenot, what you do to the land, you do to the people, and vice versa. And the CSJs have been a voice for environmental justice and care of the earth for decades. And in this work of land justice, we're really making the connection between the degradation of the earth community and the capitalist colonial system that became our way of life through the doctrine of Christian discovery. This is the Willow project that was recently approved by the Biden administration. We need to continue to do things that we need to continue to make choices that are different than the choices that we're making. And it really is going to require communities banding together to do that. So as Catholics, we need to recognize, I think, that
even though the Vatican has publicly rejected the statements of the doctrine of discovery that led us to where we are today, it is not enough to say, sorry, we were wrong. While apologies are necessary, alone they are insufficient. And so I'm gonna actually bring Brittany up here to do the closing of the rest. Yeah. So there's that image of Pope Francis apologizing, and what we want to that's really important and really exciting and creates a cultural precedent for us all to walk into. But healing requires all of us to make these kinds of actions and to actually live toward a paradigm that's different. In the words of Sarah Augustine, who is both Pueblo and Mennonite, she says, what was done in the name of Christ must be undone in the name of Christ. What was done in the name of Christ can be undone in the name of Christ. The doctrine of discovery, it was made up. We can unmake it. This legacy of land theft and the creation of private property, it was made up, and we can unmake it. And it's funny, I feel like I was like, why am I talking about the fact that I'm an auntie? But I think that religious communities, in addition to the kind of moral fortitude, the track record of care for land that you have, as you think 20, 30 years into the future, majority white religious communities do not have the wealth accumulation predicament that white families have when there's so much cultural pressure to pass things on to your kids. You can pass this on in a different way, and in a way that helps undo this system. Stephanie Morningstar from, sorry, is this okay that I'm moving around for just, is that Zoom? Okay, I'll follow you, Joe.
Not too far.
Not too far.
It's so high.
They're all from the Zoom live. See, this is why,
Not too far.
yeah, thank you. Stephanie Morningstar from the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. Great thing to know about here in the state of New York. Talks about land justice as this interwoven idea of healing climate, healing land, and healing racism, healing colonization. And this is a great example of what relationships that heal colonization in this work of land justice look like. This is a picture of the Bootleg Fire in Oregon, which is the land of the Klamath people. Sorry, microphone. So you see here, there's 3 strips of this forest. There at the bottom is where the U.S. Forest Agency. Thank you. Where's my land guy in the back? Give it up for Nolan. And who's your? And Amanda. Yeah, we've heard lots about how wonderful you are. Okay, so U.S. Forest Service had a practice of thinning trees to like prevent the damages of big wildfires. In the middle, you have thinning as well as prescribed fire that was happening. It's an ancestral practice of the Klamath people. And then you have a place where no treatment is done. So prescribed fire is a practice of indigenous people that has been suppressed, that has been made illegal, or kind of like as forestry grew as a practice of growing more lumber, was suppressed by white culture. So you see when the bootleg fire came through, where's the healthiest forest here? Yeah, where prescribed fire is. We also know that while indigenous people make up less than 5% of the world's population, they protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So we can see here that colonization is a system that has suppressed the practices of the people closest to the land. A system that has made the people closest to the land less than. And when we do that, we hurt not only ourselves, but the land herself. We hear Pope Francis say in Laudato Si, when Indigenous people remain on their land, they themselves care for it best. And this is really related to how we think about integral ecology, right? When we talk about hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, these aren't two different things we should do. They are deeply intertwined. We need to integrate the ways that we think about land care in ways that hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, because the ways that we've done harm are also intertwined. So back to our pie chart, our new map. We're talking about property planning, imagining a future of sacred lands that is integrating these three interwoven goals, that is hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And this is the work that we're doing with religious communities today. One thing I'll just very quickly mention is just the incredible work of protection, of land protection, and a lot of regeneration happening here on this campus. That a lot of religious communities, religious communities have really been a leader in using conservation easements as a phenomenal tool to protect land from development. And just going back to that bootleg fire picture though, it's not enough if we're also talking about that three-part pie chart of really regenerating the land for long-term sustainability and ability to live in this world as climate change continues. So we often talk about this idea of hands-on lands, right? That conservation easements are great at keeping extraction off of the land, but we also, I lost my spot. Yeah, it's also important to engage in those regenerative practices. We need people on the land and loving it. And this community, again, in so many ways is ahead of the curve. I mean, you're not just here, but also hosting a regenerative kelp farm led by the Shinnecock women, really rooted in the protection and regeneration. But the question we want to ask is, whose hands get to remain on these lands? So that's what we're doing here at the Land Justice Project, and we're growing this community of practice to really say, okay, if what was done in the name of Christ can be undone, what can it look like? We study stories and examples of new ways of thinking about property, real stories of success, of the return of land, of the expansion of land governance. And we're building a community of practice across the country. And the Focus Communities program is the biggest kind of and most exciting, I think, way that we're doing that. So nationally, we offer webinars. We study this together with over 1,200 sisters. But the Focus Communities program is where we're really diving in and saying, let's really imagine what is possible on these lands together. And you are one of those communities. And as I said, not only are you one of these communities, but you're a bright light in this community of practice. And just to give you a little glimpse, because you haven't been as in the weeds as Sister Karen and Sister Susan and Sister Joan, but what we're trying to do is really create a community of practice that supports communities across the country to be more creative, to have the resources to think outside of the box with these things, and to know that they're not alone. So we come here, we're doing this with every community and engaging the whole community. We bring in technical support. We have coaches who are lawyers and real estate agents and land trust experts. So it's like really, we're trying to create wraparound support and really build community. As we've mentioned many times, give it up for Sister Susan, Sister Joan, and Karen. They are your Land Justice team, and you are all the teammates. So this is, we want to share more about what's going on with this program, because this is going to take all of us together. And this is the goal that Sister Karen, Sister Susan, and Sister Joan helped make for their time in the Land Justice Focus community. We commit ourselves to the risk and cause of fostering right and just relationships among all our sisters and brothers. In particular, BIPOC communities and Earth, our common home. and sharing our resources, we will continue to build out our network and partnerships and create ongoing formation and educational opportunities in the lands we inhabit. And then continuing to engage and explore with Mi'kmaq Land Trust, how to deepen the reverence for the Earth community and how to live in a mutually enhancing manner on the land in ways that reflect the unity and inclusion of our mission, charism, and CSJ land ethic. How's that sound, everybody? All right, let's go. Okay, home stretch here. Pope Francis has said, this is like a little bit, can I drag this? Here we go. Pope Francis said in 2015, we are not living in an era of change. Oh my god, that's like gonna be there anyway, huh? I messed it up, Joan. Okay, it's okay. It's okay. We're not living in an era of change, but a change of era. We're 200 years out from Johnson versus McIntosh. We are living in a culture that can be done and undone, and we have unprecedented opportunity to address these harms, to create a future that is beyond this legacy that we've inherited. Sister Kristen Tomei, since now a Dominican that we work with, recently said this: I am becoming increasingly aware of the collective power of women religious. And I really believe that. That is why we're here, because women religious all across the country are asking these questions about the future of the lands that they love. And so with this invitation, and as you consider the future, I really believe that not only because of the moral authority and the cultural power that sisters have, but because of the ways that you are connected as communities across this country, and the ways that you are the leading progressive edge of the largest private landowner in the world, the Catholic Church. What you decide to do with land matters. It creates a way, it creates something for people to point to, for people who look to religious communities to know what's possible, which is something we've been doing for a long time. This is a moment of incredible power. So as we ask, who will steward land into the future? I want to bring us to this. Does anybody know this? Meg Wheatley? Okay, yeah, we're like 2 loops, got it. I do love this class. So one way to think about this is, Meg Wheatley talks about the fall of a dominant system and the rise of an emergent system. And she has all of these examples of roles that we can play. And, I kind of think we're in the middle, right? We're in the middle of these 2 loops emerging. My question is, who's going to resource the emergent system? Who can create the literal groundwork, the ground we can stand on to create a just and regenerative future, a future where local economies are growing the foods that they need and rebuilding habitat and reclaiming their relationship with land that this system has taken away from them? Who's going to resource that system? And again, in this moment, I see religious communities as in a really powerful moment because of in Linda Romey's words, the experience, commitment, and the unparalleled resources that you have as a body as strong and influential as women religious. Linda talks about creating a new economic arising, and I think she's right. And for that reason, I hate the word diminishment, because this is not a moment of diminishment. This is a moment of listening to the signs of the times, of asking what's needed, of moving resources to the places that they're needed, which women religious have always been doing. This is actually a moment to flourish in your charism of unity. This is a moment to become more alive than ever. And so my question is, what if the decisions that religious communities made right now were one of the most powerful moments in the history of religious communities? Just like hospitals and schools. What if sisters together made decisions that gave us a pathway to the future that we needed? What if this moment of downsizing was actually a moment of expanding ourselves into the future that we so desperately need? So that's what we're going to tend to in these next 2 days. Is what does it look like to flourish right now? What does it look like to read the signs of the times? What does it look like to do this work right now? Again, 200 years ago, Johnson versus McIntosh, to the year. What does it look like to do this work? Like this is year 1 of the next 200 years. And like the decisions that we make in rooms like this matter. That is an example of unity, of loving unity that I know this room knows a lot about. So that's what we're tending to in these next 2 days. And I am so excited to be doing this work together. I'm going to take a minute here. We're going to get a moment to talk among ourselves before a break, just for a little bit. But before we do, let me invite you to just close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. Take a big deep breath in and out. In and all breathing out together. And as you just settle into some breathing, when we talk about the collective power, let's summon, what are those images of power for you in this community? Whose faces? What memories? What places? Let's just welcome all that we're drawing on, knowing that we are a product of those things. They are here with us, moving through us. May we keep their presence before us as we do this work. When you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes. Share what's one thing that's really shimmering to you right now. What's alive for you right now?